Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. President Donald Trump announced Thursday he'll withdraw the United States from the landmark Paris Climate Accord that was signed by nearly 200 nations in 2015 and heralded as a rare moment of international collaboration to avert imminent climate disaster. Trump spoke in the White House Rose Garden, surrounded by supporters.
In order to fulfill my solemn duty to protect America and its citizens, the United States will withdraw from the Paris Climate Accord, but begin negotiations to re-enter either the Paris Accord or in really entirely new transaction on terms that are fair to the United States, its businesses, its workers, its people, its taxpayers.
President Trump's decision drew swift condemnation from climate activists, scientists, and heads of state in every corner of the globe. A spokesperson for the United Nations Secretary General called it a major disappointment. France joined Germany and Italy in issuing a joint statement expressing regret and rejecting Trump's claim he would renegotiate the Paris Accord. India and China joined European leaders in pledging to uphold their end of the deal. Back in the United States, former Secretary of State John Kerry, who led the U.S. into the Paris deal, said President Trump could have simply reduced U.S. pledges to reduce carbon emissions, which are voluntary under the Paris Agreement.
No country is required by this agreement to do anything except what that country decided to do for itself. So Donald Trump is not telling the truth to the American people when he says we have this huge burden that's been imposed on us by other nations. No. We agreed to what we would do. We designed it. It's voluntary. And the President of the United States could have simply changed that without walking away from the whole agreement.
The former president of Ireland, Mary Robinson, said Trump's decision had turned the United States into a rogue state. We'll have more on President Trump's move to withdraw from the Paris Accord after headlines. In Washington, D.C., the Trump administration says it's granted retroactive waivers to senior staff to allow them to skirt ethics rules aimed at preventing conflicts of interest. The disclosure came in undated memos by the counsel to the president that were made public Wednesday evening. One of those benefiting from the move is Trump's chief strategist, Stephen Bannon, who's reportedly maintained contact with the far-right website Breitbart Media in violation of a White House ethics pledge. Bannon formerly headed Breitbart, which frequently publishes racist, sexist, and xenophobic news. Director of the Office of Government Ethics, Walter Schaub, told the New York Times the move was invalid, saying, quote, "There is no such thing as a retroactive waiver. If you need a retroactive waiver, you violated a rule," he said. In Russia, President Vladimir Putin denied allegations Thursday the Russian government meddled in the 2016 U.S. election, but Putin suggested for the first time that independent Russian hackers may have played a role in undermining the campaign of Hillary Clinton.
Hackers are free-spirited people. They are like artists. If they are in a good mood in the morning, they wake up and paint. It is the same for hackers. They wake up today, they read that something is happening in interstate relations, and if they are patriotically minded, they start to make up their own contribution to what they believe is the good fight against those who speak badly about Russia.
Putin's comments came as two Democratic senators said they asked former FBI Director James Comey to investigate whether Attorney General Jeff Sessions perjured himself when he testified to Congress in January that he didn't have any communications with the Russians ahead of the November election. Senators Al Franken of Minnesota and Pat Leahy of Vermont say they were expecting Comey to brief them on the matter on May 12th, but say the briefing never happened because President Trump fired Comey on May 9th after Sessions and his Deputy Attorney General recommended Comey's termination. Comey's scheduled to testify publicly to the Senate Intelligence Committee next Thursday. President Trump's senior advisor and son-in-law, Jared Kushner, took advantage of a federal program aimed at helping low-income communities to build a gleaming 50-story residential tower in a wealthy neighborhood in New Jersey. That's according to the Washington Post, which reported that Kushner and his real estate partners drew up a map similar to a gerrymandered congressional district that falsely claimed the areas around the tower at 65 Bay Street in Jersey City were blighted. In fact, the map stretches miles into areas of South Jersey City where poverty and unemployment are high, while avoiding affluent neighborhoods just blocks from the residential tower. The move gave Kushner's company access to $50 million in low-cost financing under a program aimed at promoting investment in areas of high unemployment. Kushner and his partners are attempting to use a similar map to secure $150 million to build a pair of luxury towers in Jersey City's Journal Square neighborhood. In the Philippines, at least 36 people are dead after a gunman stormed a Manila casino resort and lit the building on fire. The gunman reportedly fired shots into a television screen and set gambling tables on fire with gasoline, setting off a stampede and suffocating guests. Police described the attacker as a white, English-speaking foreigner. They reported he died after he fled with more than $2 million in stolen casino chips, holed up in a nearby hotel room, and committed suicide by setting himself on fire. Friday morning's attack was falsely labeled terrorism by President Donald Trump, but police say it was a failed attempt at a heist. The attack came after Philippines President Rodrigo Duterte declared martial law in Mindanao as his forces battle ISIS-allied militants in the city of Marawi. On Thursday, 11 Philippine soldiers were killed in a so-called friendly fire airstrike aimed at the fighters. Duterte has threatened to declare martial law nationwide if the insurgency continues. In Iraq, the journalistic monitoring group Air Wars reports more than 20 civilians were killed, most of them women and children, after airstrikes or artillery attacks struck their homes in western Mosul. Among those reportedly killed were resident Hussein Abbas and 11 members of a single family. Most sources blamed U.S.-backed Iraqi forces for the deaths. In Venezuela, gunmen shot and killed a judge Wednesday night at a Caracas checkpoint set up by opposition protesters hoping to topple the government of President Nicolás Maduro. Local media reported Judge Nelson Moncada may have been targeted for assassination because he sentenced opposition leader Leopoldo López to nearly 14 years in prison for inciting violence during mass protests 3 years ago. This is Venezuela's Interior Minister, Néstor Ravorol.
No se descarta la posibilidad que haya sido un móvil de
We have not ruled out that this was done by an assassin, a hitman contracted by right-wing terrorists aimed at creating more terror.
With the killing, the death toll from 2 months of clashes between security forces and anti-government protesters rose to 62. On Thursday, President Nicolás Maduro said he would hold a national referendum on his plan to create a new constituent assembly that would have the power to rewrite Venezuela's constitution. In Colombia, massive protests are growing in the port city of Buenaventura, despite violent repression by the police and Colombian military. The government's deployed thousands of soldiers and riot police amidst the uprising in the majority Afro-Colombian city. Residents launched the ongoing general strike April 16th to protest the lack of basic services, including clean drinking water, health care, and primary school education. Dozens of protesters have been wounded by soldiers firing live ammunition at peaceful marches. Hundreds more demonstrators have been arrested. In Mexico City, journalists gathered outside the offices of the Attorney General Thursday demanding an investigation into the abduction of Salvador Adame Pardo, a journalist who was kidnapped by gunmen in the state of Michoacán on May 18th. The abduction came amidst a wave of murders of Mexican journalists. This is Frida Ortiz, Salvador Adame's wife.
All journalists in Mexico are scared. Journalists go through this constantly. Today, we should not be separated. We should be united. We have different opinions, but we should be united so that no other Salvador goes missing.
Mexico's National Commission on Human Rights reports over 120 journalists have been killed in Mexico since 2000. Also in Mexico, the United Nations has launched an $18 million campaign to support Central American unaccompanied migrant children. The Office of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights says the fund will help protect children escaping sexual violence, extortion, and forced conscription into criminal gangs. This is Ima, a Honduran child who fled to Mexico.
We can't live in Honduras anymore. There are many people leaving the country for the same reason: crime. The gangs are bad. There are deaths of innocent people, children. We can't live in Honduras anymore.
The UNHCR says more than 180,000 children fled Central America in 2016, a tenfold increase over the last 5 years. Back in the United States, the Trump administration has further restricted rules on applicants for U.S. visas, rolling out a questionnaire this week that'll require them to provide 5 years' worth of social media handles and 15 years of biographical information. The administration calls the questions voluntary, but the new form says applicants who don't provide the information might see their visas delayed or denied. The restrictions came as the Trump administration asked the U.S. Supreme Court to reinstitute its ban on refugees and travelers from 6 majority Muslim nations. Federal judges have enjoined the travel ban, ruling it likely violates the First Amendment's Establishment Clause, which prohibits religious discrimination. And Princeton University professor of African-American Studies, Keeanga-Yamahtta Taylor, has canceled all her upcoming public appearances amidst a wave of death threats that followed a Fox News report critical of her comments about President Donald Trump, which she made at a May 20th commencement address at Hampshire College in Massachusetts.
The President of the United States, the most powerful politician in the world, is a racist, sexist megalomaniac. It is not a benign observation, but has meant tragic consequences for many people in this country. From the terror-inducing raids in the communities of undocumented immigrants to his disparaging of refugees in search of freedom and respite.
Princeton University professor Taylor said she would not give speeches planned for Seattle and San Diego this week out of fear for the safety of her family after she received a torrent of vile comments and threats to her life. In a statement, Taylor wrote, quote, "We have to change this dynamic and begin to build a massive movement against racism, sexism, and bigotry in this country. I remain undaunted in my commitment to that project," she wrote. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.